3 years ago, I made a decision that I thought was the most generous thing I had ever done in my life. Looking back now, standing in my new apartment surrounded by my own furniture, my own appliances, my own peace and quiet, I realized that decision was actually the best investment I ever made, just not in the way I originally intended. I want to be clear about something before I get into all of this, because I know how these stories can sound. I am not the kind of person who keeps score. I don't help people so that they owe me later. I genuinely believed, for a long time, that family was worth sacrificing for. I believed that until the people I was sacrificing for showed me, very clearly, that I was the only one who felt that way. My name is not important, but what is important is this. I am 36 years old, I am a licensed physical therapist with my own small practice, and I own my home outright. Every square foot of it, my name, and only my name, is on the deed. I want you to remember that detail, because it becomes very relevant later. My mother passed away when I was 22 and my older sister was 30. She was the one who held our family together. And when she was gone, the three of us, my father, my sister, and I sort of drifted in different directions. My sister had already been married for 2 years by then. Her husband was the kind of man who had a loud opinion about everything and actual knowledge about nothing. They moved to another state within a year of my mother's funeral, chasing some business idea he had that, from what I understood, never really went anywhere. My father stayed in our hometown. He had a small pension from 30 years working at the county government office, and for a while, that was enough. He puttered around in the yard, watched his shows, called me every Sunday. We were close in that quiet, unspoken way that some fathers and daughters are. He didn't always know how to say he was proud of me, but I knew he was. Then he had a minor stroke at 68. Nothing devastating, thank God. His speech came back fully within a few weeks. His mobility was fine, but his doctor was very direct. He needed lower stress, a more stable environment, someone nearby in case something happened again. He was living alone in a house with a leaking roof and a heating system that was one cold snap away from giving out entirely. The math was simple, even if the emotions were complicated. I had been renting a 2-bedroom apartment at the time, comfortable enough for me, but not the right setup for a parent who needed space and accessibility. So I made a decision. I bought a house. I want to be very specific here, because the specifics matter. I put down $60,000 from my savings. I took out a mortgage in my name alone. My father's name was not on a single document. I did this intentionally and transparently. I sat down with my father and explained it to him plainly. I told him, "This is my house, Dad, and you are welcome to live here for as long as you need to. I am not charging you rent, but I want you to understand that this is my property." He nodded and said, "I raised a good one." That was that. He moved in the following month. I converted the main floor bedroom into his so he wouldn't have to manage the stairs. I set up handrails in the bathroom. I bought a medical alert bracelet that he complained about wearing but wore anyway. I paid the mortgage, the utilities, the groceries, the co-pays for his follow-up appointments. My father's pension went into his personal account, which he used for his own small pleasures: a magazine subscription, the occasional lottery ticket, his Sunday morning donuts from the bakery on Elm Street. My sister called about twice a year. Holiday obligations. Her husband never got on the phone. She always asked how Dad was doing in the tone of someone asking about the weather politely, without real investment. I answered the same way. Fine. He's doing fine. This went on for 3 years. I want you to understand what those 3 years looked like from the inside, because it wasn't always hard. There were genuinely good moments. My father learned how to use a tablet so we could watch the same shows and text each other jokes. He grew tomatoes in the backyard and left little bags of them on the kitchen counter for me. He met my neighbor's golden retriever and immediately became that dog's second favorite person in the world. But there were hard parts too. I restructured my entire schedule around his appointments. I gave up a work trip to a conference in Denver because I didn't feel right leaving him alone for 4 days. I dated someone for 8 months who ended things partly because, as he put it, your life is already very full. I didn't argue. He wasn't wrong. I carried all of this without resentment, or at least, I thought I did. I carried it because I chose it, because I loved my father and I wanted him to be safe and comfortable. That part was always real. What I did not carry gracefully was the silence from my sister. Not the silence itself, exactly, but the audacity of that silence paired with the assumption that I would just keep going indefinitely with no support and no acknowledgement. Core day. Every time I got off one of those twice-a-year calls, I felt a specific kind of tired that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. And then one September, out of nowhere, she called on a Tuesday. Not a holiday. Not my father's birthday. A random Tuesday in September. And she was calling from a number I didn't recognize, which meant she had changed her phone again. When I answered, she was warm in a way that immediately made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. She asked how I was doing. She asked about my practice. She said, "It has been way too long. I've been thinking about this a lot. Family is everything, you know?" I said yes. I waited. She told me that she and her husband had decided they wanted to be closer. That life was too short, and Dad wasn't getting any younger, and she felt terrible about how much distance there had been. She said they were thinking about coming to visit soon, just to reconnect. Would that be okay? I said yes, of course, come visit. I told my father that evening. He got quiet in a way I couldn't quite read. Then he said, "Well, that's something." I didn't push him. I should have. They arrived 2 weeks later with 3 large suitcases and a tote bag full of wine they brought as a gift, but also proceeded to drink entirely themselves over the following days. The first night was fine, actually. We ordered pizza. My father was happy to see my sister. There was laughter. Her husband shook my hand too hard the way men do when they're performing confidence, and made a joke about my house that was almost a compliment. Almost. The second day was when it started. I came downstairs in the morning to find my sister already in the kitchen making coffee like it was her kitchen, which, to be clear, it was not. She had moved my French press to a different counter. Small thing. I didn't say anything. My father was already at the table. He looked rested and happy in a way that made me want to give her the benefit of the doubt. Her husband came down an hour later and announced that he was going to take a look at the backyard, like he was surveying property. He stood on the porch with his arms crossed and his head tilted like he was calculating something. I watched him from the kitchen window and said nothing. By day 4, I noticed that the tote bag of wine was still in the corner, but the suitcases had not moved from the guest room. I asked my sister, gently, how long they were planning to stay. She gave me this look, just a flicker, and said, "We're still figuring things out. Is that okay?" I said yes. By day 8, her husband was watching television in the living room when I got home from work like it was his living room. He had rearranged the throw pillows. He had opinions about my television package, and shared them with me unsolicited. My sister cooked dinner twice that week, which was genuinely appreciated. But both times she cooked things my father couldn't really eat given his dietary restrictions, and when I quietly pointed this out, she looked at me like I had accused her of something. The dynamic was shifting in a way I could feel but couldn't yet name. My father seemed caught in the middle of it, pulled in 2 directions, smiling too wide at dinner like he was afraid of something breaking. I called my closest friend one night from my car in the driveway, because I didn't want to be overheard. I told her everything. She listened, and then she said, "Do you know if your dad has anything? Money-wise, I mean. Like savings or property?" I thought about it. My father had mentioned once, years ago, that his own father had left him a small parcel of land in a rural county about 90 minutes from here. He'd never done anything with it. I had completely forgotten about it until that moment. I didn't sleep well that night. The next morning, I asked my father, casually, "Whatever happened to that land Grandpa left you?" He looked at me for a second, then looked away. "Sold it," he said quietly, "few years back. When the roof was leaking, before you bought the house. Had to." I nodded. How much did he get for it, I wondered. Not much, knowing the area, but enough to matter to someone who was expecting it. I put together the rest of it pretty quickly after that. My sister didn't know Dad had sold the land. She thought it was still there, sitting, waiting to be inherited. She thought that if she positioned herself as the dutiful daughter, the one who was present and attentive, she'd have a claim to it when the time came. She didn't know that there was nothing left to claim. And she hadn't asked my father directly because that would have been too obvious. The wine, the warmth, the sudden urgency about family, it was all bookkeeping. I made a decision that day, sitting at my kitchen table with my coffee, listening to her husband's voice carry down the hall as he talked to someone on the phone. I decided I was going to let this play out. Not because I was being passive. Because I needed to see it through to the end. And because I had some things to arrange on my own side. I called a friend of mine who works in real estate and asked her about the rental market. Then I called my mortgage company. Then I started making a very quiet list. What followed was 3 more weeks of slow escalation that I endured with a stillness I am genuinely proud of. My sister started making decisions about the house as though she lived there. She bought a new bath mat for the upstairs bathroom without asking and left the receipt on the counter like I should reimburse her. She rearranged the pantry. She started having opinions about how I organize things. Once, and this is the one that almost broke my composure, she suggested to my father that maybe he'd be more comfortable in the guest room since she and her husband were settled in there, and they could take over the main floor room since it was bigger. My father looked at me when she said that. I smiled at him. I said, let's not worry about moving things around right now. Smooth, final, done. Her husband, emboldened, started commenting on my work schedule. You're home late a lot, he observed one evening. I said, yes, I run my own practice, that's how it works. He said, well, someone's gotta be here for your dad during the day. The implication being that someone was them. The implication being that they were contributing something. The implication being that this arrangement should be renegotiated. I took a slow breath and said, I appreciate that you've been here. And I walked upstairs. About a week before I was ready to make my move, my sister sat down with me at the kitchen table after my father had gone to bed. She told me she'd been thinking, and she thought it might make sense for her and her husband to stay on more permanently. Just to help with Dad. Just to have some stability. She said it would be good for all of us. She said family should be together. I asked her, what does more permanently mean, exactly? She said, well, they weren't in a rush to go back. Things in their life were in transition. She said it would really be a weight off her shoulders to know there was a home base. I looked at her across the table, my sister, 8 years older, who I had not heard from on a regular basis in over a decade, who had called me exactly twice a year for 3 years while I rearranged my entire life to care for our father, who had shown up with wine and warmth and a calculation I wasn't supposed to see. I said, I hear you. Let me think about it. She smiled and touched my hand and said, I knew you'd understand. I went upstairs and finished my list. Moving day was a Saturday in October. The week before, I had signed a lease on a beautiful 2-bedroom apartment downtown, on the 4th floor, with a balcony that faces east. I had hired movers. I had called my mortgage company and confirmed everything I needed to know about what would happen if I stopped making payments. I had also, and this is important, had a very honest conversation with my father. I sat with him in the backyard on a Wednesday evening, just the two of us. The tomatoes were done for the season. The neighbor's dog barked twice somewhere down the street. I told him everything. I told him what I believed my sister's real reason for coming was. I told him about the land, which he already knew he'd sold. I told him I was planning to move out and that I was not abandoning him, I was protecting both of us. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I wondered how long it would take her to show up. I said, you knew? He said, I didn't know, but I suspected. She's always had her mother's practicality without her mother's heart. And then he looked at me and said, I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner. I told him not to be sorry. I told him I had already found a solution. I had spoken to a senior living community about 20 minutes away that had a beautiful independent living section full apartment, his own space, a garden program, a whole calendar of activities. I'd toured it twice without telling anyone. The monthly cost was within a range I could manage, and I would be covering it. He would not be left without a home or care. He would be in a better situation, honestly, than he was currently in, because he would have peers and programming and I would visit every week without fail. He teared up a little. He said, you planned all of this yourself? I said, yes. He said, your mother would be so proud of you. And I had to look at the fence for a minute before I could say anything back. I told my sister, 2 days before moving day, that I needed everyone to be home Saturday morning. That I had something to discuss with the family. She assumed I meant I was agreeing to their new arrangement. She told her husband that evening I heard her through the wall, her voice just slightly too loud. She said, I think she's coming around. Saturday morning, the moving truck arrived at 9. I was already downstairs when my sister came into the kitchen in her robe, confused. She looked out the front window. She looked at me. She said, "What is this?" I said, "I'm moving." She said, "What do you mean, you're moving? This is your house." I said, "Yes, it is. Which means I can also choose to leave it." Her husband came downstairs, assessed the situation, and immediately put on his negotiating tone. He said, "Let's all just slow down here." I said I was on a schedule and the movers charged by the hour. What followed was approximately 4 hours of the most clarifying experience of my life. The movers were professionals. They were efficient and careful and completely unbothered by the chaos happening around them. They took my bedroom furniture, my desk, my equipment, my clothing, my kitchen items, everything that I had purchased. I was precise about this. I had a list. The couch was mine. The dining table and chairs were mine. The television was mine. The coffee maker, the good knives, the stand mixer, the bed frames, all of it, mine. Purchased by me, receipts available. My sister followed me from room to room. She alternated between disbelief and accusation. She said I was abandoning our father. I said our father was fully provided for, and that I would be happy to explain the arrangement I had made for him. She said I was doing this out of spite. I said I was doing this because it was my house and my belongings and my decision. She said I was being cruel. I let that one land, waited a beat, and then said, "I don't think you know what that word means in this context." Her husband tried a different approach. He said, "Listen, we've been here for almost a month helping out, the least you can do is let us get settled properly." I said, "You've been here for 3.5 weeks without contributing to the mortgage, utilities, or groceries, and I would like you to reflect on who has been helping whom." He didn't have a response to that. My sister found her angle eventually. She went to my father, who was sitting in the living room watching all of this with an expression I can only describe as tired and resolved. She knelt down and took his hands and said, "Dad, tell her she can't do this. Tell her to stay." My father looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Your sister has taken care of me for 3 years. She has earned the right to make her own choices. And so have I." My sister looked at him like he had said something in another language. He said, "I'm going to be moving too." He said it simply and without drama. Then he told her about the senior living community, told her I had arranged it, told her it sounded like something he was genuinely looking forward to. My sister stood up slowly. She looked between me and my father. And then, like a switch had been flipped, the warmth was completely gone. She said, "So you've already planned all of this behind our backs?" I said, "I planned it to protect my father, which is more than I can say for anyone else in this room." Then came the question I had been waiting for. Her husband said, "Well, what about the house? The mortgage?" I said, "What about it?" He said, "Someone has to keep paying it. If you're leaving, what happens?" I said, "The mortgage is in my name. I will be managing it as I see fit." He said, "And if you stop paying it?" I said, "Then it goes into default, and the bank forecloses, and everyone in it has to leave." I said this the way you'd explain a recipe. Plainly, without emphasis. The silence in that room was unlike anything I have experienced before or since. My sister said, "You wouldn't do that." I said, "I'm not saying I will. I'm saying that's how mortgages work, and since this is my mortgage, that's a decision only I can make." She said, "What are we supposed to do?" I said, "I'm not sure." I said it honestly, without cruelty. I genuinely was not sure what they were going to do, and I genuinely had stopped being responsible for that answer. I said, "I will tell you this, though. The land Grandpa left Dad. Dad sold it years ago. There's no inheritance. There's no land. There's nothing to wait for." I watched her face go through several things in quick succession. I watched her husband's jaw tighten. I watched them look at each other in a way that told me everything I had suspected about their intentions was exactly correct. Then I said, "Goodbye. I hope things work out for you." And I walked out to where the movers were loading the last of my things into the truck. My father came out a few minutes later with his jacket and a small bag. He had packed the essentials the day before, quietly, while my sister and her husband were watching something in the living room. He had not told them. He had also not told them that he had already signed his intake paperwork at the senior living community and that his move-in date was the following Wednesday. I helped him into my car. He looked at the house once as we pulled out of the driveway. He didn't say anything. I didn't either. Sometimes there isn't anything to say that the moment isn't already saying for you. We had breakfast together at a diner 3 blocks from my new apartment. He had pancakes. I had eggs. He told me a story about my mother that I had never heard before. About the time she convinced him to enter a chili cook-off and he came in last place out of 11 people and she laughed so hard she cried. I laughed too. It was a good morning. I helped him move into his new place the following Wednesday. His room was bright and on the ground floor. There was a small patio with a door to the garden. He had already spoken to someone at the front desk about the tomato growing program. He was going to be okay. More than okay. As for my sister and her husband, they stayed in my house for 19 more days. I know this because my mortgage company called me to confirm some account details and happened to mention that they had inquired about whether they could modify the account name, which they could not, because it was not their account. 19 days, and then they were gone. I don't know where they went. I didn't ask. The house eventually sold. I listed it, handled the process, paid off the remaining mortgage, and kept what was left. It was a reasonable amount. I put most of it into a fund for my father's care. It felt right. My sister has called me twice since then. The first time, I let it go to voicemail. She said she thought we should talk, that there had been a misunderstanding, that she hoped I was doing okay. The second time, she left a message saying she knew things had gotten complicated but that she hoped I understood her situation. She said family is family. I have not called back. I'm not angry, exactly. Anger requires a certain kind of investment in the other person's opinion of you, and I find that I no longer have that. What I have instead is this: a 4th-floor apartment with an east-facing balcony, a practice I've grown by 20% in the past year because I'm not rearranging my schedule around anyone else's needs, a standing Sunday breakfast with my father, and a very clear sense of what I owe people and what I don't. My father called me last week to tell me that his tomatoes have started coming in. He left a little bag of them at the front desk for me to pick up when I visit. I'm going this Sunday. Some people will read all of this and think I was too hard. That family is worth more grace than I gave. I understand that perspective. I held it myself for a long time. But I have come to believe that grace given endlessly to people who mistake it for obligation is not grace anymore. It's something else. And you are allowed to stop. I am not the person who kept score. I am the person who finally looked at the score, understood what it meant, and chose to walk off the field entirely. I've never slept better in my life.